The appalling crimes of Jeffrey Epstein and his associates have rightly stunned the whole world. The scale of Epstein's operation was shocking, selling human beings for sex, turning hundreds of young women and girls into victims and survivors. And it is those women who are at the front of our minds today as we finally seek transparency, truth and accountability. Mr. Speaker, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor shamed our country and the royal family. But for too long, members of Parliament were barred from even raising criticisms of him, let alone properly scrutinising his role as trade envoy. Because of the outdated tradition that mentions of any member of the royal family in this House must, in the words of the previous Speaker, be, and I quote, very rare, very sparing and very respectful. I encountered this firsthand back in 2011 when I was asked to respond to an adjournment debate on behalf of Lord Green, who was then the Minister for Trade and Investment. The adjournment was brought by the late Paul Flynn. But even he, an ardent and outspoken Republican, as I'm sure many of us remember, wasn't allowed to raise any actual concerns about Andrew himself. Paul called it a negative privilege, and that's what it was. He said his mouth was bandaged by archaic rules, and that had very real and damaging consequences. And I'm pleased to see the Minister in his place, because I know he was also constrained by those rules when he raised similar issues. And in that debate, Epstein's name wasn't even mentioned once. There was no chance to debate the substance. And standing in for the responsible minister, I set out the government's position as it had been for a decade, in support of the Prince's role as the trade envoy. Looking back and knowing what we all know now, I'm horrified by it. I can't imagine what it must have been like for the survivors and their families to hear Andrew praised like that, as they heard so often all around the world. So I apologise to them, and I'm determined to change things. Mr. Speaker, I was struck by the words of Amanda Roberts, Virginia Giuffre's sister-in-law, after Andrew was arrested last week. She said this could be a stain on the royal family for the rest of our history, or, quote, it could be a moment where they and we decide that this is the time when cultural change happens. And as a staunch supporter of His Royal Highness the King and the royal family, I believe we must help to bring about that cultural change now.
Would he give way?
Happy to give way.
I'm most grateful to the leader of the Liberal Democrats for giving way. He's making a powerful speech. I'm sure he will agree that decades of deferential, frankly sycophantic treatment by Parliament and state authorities are being exposed as having enabled Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor to behave as though he were untouchable. Yep. And I'm sure he will join me in calling on the government to introduce independent oversight of those members of the royal family who undertake official duties and require both transparency and scrutiny over anything from now on paid for by the state, because apparently they work for us.
I'm grateful for that intervention. We must build a culture of transparency and accountability. I think that is essential. And I hope we as a House will look at ending the archaic negative privilege rules Paul Flynn spoke about. Remove the bandages from our mouths. And today, free of those bandages in relation to Andrew, our motion focuses on finally getting the truth out about his role as Special Representative for Trade and Investment. I'll give way again.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, can I commend the right honourable member for bringing, and his party for bringing this forward? Commend him for the way that he interviewed on TV this morning. And certainly, he doesn't just speak for this House; he speaks for this nation. And we're all greatly shocked at what has taken place. But does he agree as well? King Charles, Queen Camilla, Edward, Sophie, William, Kate are members of the royal family at this time who also need our support. And does he agree that perhaps maybe now is a time to tell them that we in this House love them, that this nation loves them, and that we understand the pain that they're suffering, and our support is with those members of the royal family who are above this and above this reproach?
I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman's intervention. I think he probably speaks for the whole House. And indeed, the intention of this debate is to bring this House together. And the changes that we think are necessary would indeed protect the royal family and strengthen the monarchy, which in some places is being criticised. And I think it's important, and that's why we need these reforms. But, Mr. Speaker, if I can go back to the motion, because it focuses at the start of this at the appointment of the former Prince Andrew to this role back in 2001. We've seen the reporting that the King, then Prince of Wales, expressed his concerns about that appointment. More alarmingly, we have read that Peter Mandelson wrote to the then Prime Minister Tony Blair, as his former Trade Secretary, pushing for Andrew's appointment. One friend of Epstein lobbying for a job for another friend of Epstein, a job that might help Epstein enrich himself. So we clearly need to get to the bottom of that appointment and the role Mandelson himself played in it. And only the papers demanded by this motion will allow us to do that. We need them published as soon as possible, without delay. And then there are the many questions about Andrew's conduct in the role, now subject to a criminal investigation. So clearly, Mr. Speaker, as you said, we do not want to jeopardise that investigation with anything we say today. We must let the police get on with their work, especially for Epstein's victims, survivors and their families. They deserve to see justice done at last. But I would just highlight one example of the way Jeffrey Epstein sought to use Andrew's role as trade envoy to enrich himself. I'm happy to give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. My right honourable friend talks about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor's role as a trade envoy. When I was working overseas for the British Council, Mountbatten-Windsor came to an exhibition that I was putting on about Dolly the sheep, which was a fine example of British scientific innovation. Mountbatten-Windsor stood up in front of Japanese dignitaries and business people and said, "This is rubbish, this is Frankenstein's sheep." Would my right honourable friend agree with me that that's a very poor example of promoting British trade interests?
Well, I'm grateful for my honourable friend's intervention. It shows that not only some of the scandals that we've heard about are things that we need to focus on, but if the trade envoy was actually speaking against British commercial interests, that raises even greater questions. And I hope not just this debate, but other debates in select committees and elsewhere will get to the bottom of that issue. But I was saying I would like to highlight one example of how Jeffrey Epstein sought to use Andrew's role as trade envoy to enrich himself. Channel 4 uncovered emails in the Epstein files in which Epstein was trying to meet the Libyan dictator Gaddafi in the dying months of the Gaddafi regime to help him find somewhere to put his money. I think something that the minister actually raised at the time. In other words, Epstein looked at the deadly crisis in Libya and saw a chance to make some money. And he thought his friend Andrew could help. And this is what it says in one of the emails. "I wondered if PA could make the intro." A few weeks later, Andrew wrote back, "Libya fixed." Though the Epstein-Gaddafi meeting doesn't appear to have happened, it does show clearly what these relationships were all about for Epstein, increasing his own wealth and power. The idea that the role of special trade envoy for our United Kingdom may have been used to help him do that, to help a vile paedophile sex trafficker enrich himself, is truly sickening. And again, I want to pay tribute to the Minister who tried to raise this at the time, like his colleague, the late Paul Flynn. And it shows, again, why we need to change the rules of this House that govern the debate here and ministers. But Mr. I give way.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for giving way. I posed a question. Sorry, the leader of the Liberal Democrats. I stand corrected. The Leader of the... It's coming. I thank the Leader of the Liberal Democrats for giving way. I asked the question to the Chief Secretary yesterday in this House about the speed of bringing legislation forward. Victims, other members of the House, members of the Lords, we all need this process to be done as swiftly as possible. I just wondered if you agree that whatever happens with Andrew or anybody else, that you also agree that the Chief Secretary's comments that we do need to bring this forward and that we need to keep pushing to get legislation swiftly, not in years to come.
Well, I'm grateful for the Honourable Gentleman's intervention, both for his Freudian slip and indeed for his suggestion that we do need to speed up action in this area. But if I can begin to conclude, Mr. Speaker, in many ways this is the first truly global scandal, from the White House in Silicon Valley to Oslo and Paris. But it's also a deeply British scandal, reaching right to the top of the British establishment. Because can there be many people more symbolic of the rot that eats away at the British establishment than the former Duke of York and Special Trade Envoy, and the former Business Secretary, First Secretary of State and Ambassador to the United States? Their association with Epstein and their actions on his behalf, while trusted with the privilege of public office, are a stain on our country. Today we must begin to clean away that stain with the disinfectant of transparency. Because whether it is the President of the United States and his Commerce Secretary, or Peter Mandelson and Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, or Epstein himself, their victims and survivors have seen those responsible evade accountability and escape justice for far too long. I desperately hope that is ending now, and I hope the House will approve this motion.
Yeah.